What's the darkest storyline you've seen in a kid's TV show or movie? Doug's Christmas special when Pork Chop bit the rich girl and her family tried to have him put down. The whole episode was Doug trying to stop the rich family from killing his dog. Merry Christmas. Yeah, that was a weird episode. The Peanuts episode Why? Charlie Brown. Why? It's about a young girl that is diagnosed with cancer and it depicts her battle as well as how the main character Charlie deals with it. Very deep and sad episode, and it shook me up as a young kid. For me, it would have to be that episode of Thomas the Tank Engine where Henry is bricked into a tunnel for misbehaving. He's eventually let out when he promises to be good, and the narrator goes, "I think he's learned his lesson, don't you?" I mean, he was basically locked up in a tunnel for months for misbehaving. Felt a bit extreme. Code Lyoko. On the outside and during the first season or so, it seems somewhat lighthearted, but as time goes on, things begin to break down. The intelligence in Lyoko goes from just causing trouble to actively attempting to kill the children as well as anyone else in the way. The kids still have to go to school and deal with normal life things, but almost weekly they end up having to deal with the thing in Lyoko while at least one other tries to make sure things stay okay in the real world. Every time they stop the intelligence's plans, they then reset the day so that no one else but them even remembers it happened. They become battle weary and traumatized, and nobody but them even realizes what's been happening for months. For me, I remember the episode from Courage, the cowardly dog that dealt with domestic abuse. Bunny was being abused by Mad Dog and it was the first glimpse for me into what that kind of relationship was like for many people. Now that I think about it as an adult, Courage had quite a lot of episodes that delved into various mature topics. Courage was the first thing that came to mind. I don't know what age group that's supposed to be made for. I'm not a kid anymore, but that crap still creeps me out. I haven't seen anyone talk about the Owls of Ga'Hoole series yet. Those books were actually kinda fricked. I read them when I was about 10 years old and I reread a little bit of them and boy are they dark. The movie was fairly watered down, but even then, there's genocide of a race considered inferior and impure. There were parts where they would lock owls in empty chambers to hypnotize them and to become mindless slaves. And I think the worst part was when one of the owls sliced open a mouse and proceeded to tickle it with a grass blade while it was still alive. Like, geez, so much for a middle grade book. Literal owl Nazis. The later books had literal owl raven demons. The Disney version of Hunchback of Notre Dame. While in the midst of a genocide, a religious fanatic raises a deformed child to loathe himself. This repressed fanatic then lusts after a gypsy and blames her for tempting him, so kicks the persecution up a notch. Amazing what singing gargoyles could distract me from when I was a kid. Frollo, I'll find her. I'll burn down all of Paris if I have to. Me, not thinking anything of it, just assume it's typical villainous hyperbole. Next shot, half of Paris is on fire. Me, well, that was unexpected. The Velveteen Rabbit. A kid gets scarlet fever. His room had to be disinfected, but scarlet fever is so contagious they had to burn all of his books and stuffed animals, including his favorite Velveteen Rabbit. And let's pretend it's a kid's movie. A horror show is what that is. That made me cry as a kid. Coraline was kinda dark. It's literally about a demon that kidnaps children and keeps their ghost locked up in a tiny room. I don't know how, but I forgot all about this film and now I really want to rewatch it. I loved Coraline. In The Lion King, it's pretty bad that Simba has to watch his dad die. Even worse that his own uncle murdered him. Even worse that the uncle makes Simba believe it's his own fault. Confession. I watched The Lion King for the first time only as a teenager, but I still cried. Ice King from Adventure Time's entire story arc. He was just a silly antagonist in the first season and then you learn his past. He found a powerful magic crown that slowly changes his mind until he can't remember anything about who he was. It's basically like dementia. They took a silly villain and turned him into something very tragic. He used to call his girlfriend his princess but can't remember her and so kidnaps random princesses. Gravity Falls is pretty complicated for the target audience. It was some of the few shows that you had to watch in a chronological order. In most of the other shows the characters just reset. It's full of not only creepy moments, but also a lot of hidden messages. There are people on the internet 10 to 20 years above the target audience, who are still searching for hidden messages. Sad that it didn't get a third season. The Last Unicorn gets pretty dark, although I didn't understand all of the implications until I was much older. The character Molly Grew has been living with a bunch of outlaw men when she sees the unicorn, who traditionally appeared to virgins, and screams, "Where have you been? How dare you come to me now when I am this?" And then there's the unicorn herself. She becomes human for a while, falls in love with a prince, then turns back into a unicorn and regrets not being human anymore. It's sorta happy in that she frees all the other unicorns, but her own arc is quite sad. Oh yeah, and it has the wino drunk skeleton dude who glows red and turns mean fast. That crap freaked me out as a kid. Let's not forget when the unicorn very first gets turned human. I can feel this body dying all around me. 10/10 would traumatize my children with this film. I think the DC animated universe wins hands down. Batman Beyond is probably the darkest of all. I was honestly surprised when I rewatched it and realized that it implied a lot of the villains just died at the end of their episodes. Heck, just look at Return of the Joker. Tim Drake was tortured by the Joker into insanity, and as an adult still dealt with PTSD from that and eventually the Joker's mind control BS. They even had to censor the Joker's death. He got electrocuted in the released version, but originally he actually shot the Joker in the chest. You can still find that scene. I think it might even be used in the DVD version. Otherwise, I'd say Static Shock is second. It had a lot of very dark episodes, but they were done in a way that kept it child friendly. Highlights that I remember. Very first episode, he got his powers from going to a gang fight which got raided by police. For obvious reasons, a lot of other Bang Babies were former gang members. One Bang Baby, Permafrost, was a homeless girl whose mother died of illness after her stepfather abandoned them, which prompted her to run away from home. A brother-sister pair, Boom and Mirage, lost their parents before becoming Bang Babies. Their episode ended with Mirage being taken away by child services. Virgil's mother, Jean Hawkins, was a paramedic who died 3 years before the show in an event called the Dakota Riots, when she got hit by a stray bullet. At one point, Virgil got to go back in time to when his mother was still alive and tried to save her, telling her she'd die that night. After he left, she went to do her job anyway, fully aware she'd die. Perhaps the most relevant episode to modern issues though, and the reason I'm mentioning Static Shock. One episode dealt with Virgil and Richie befriending a kid named Jimmy who was severely bullied. It ended with Jimmy stealing a gun from his dad's safe, planning to shoot the bully. During the confrontation, the gun accidentally goes off and shoots Richie in the leg. I'll never forget seeing Richie on the floor clutching his leg and screaming in pain. It hurts. It's not like on TV. Then afterwards Virgil's talking to a therapist about it and saying Richie was Jimmy's friend, and the therapist's response, "Bullets don't discriminate between friends and enemies. They hurt everyone." Just a powerful episode. That's not an issue you'd ever see on a kids show today. I honestly wish that episode aired more for the current high school generation. Maybe it would have changed something. Are You Afraid of the Dark? That show was dark in general, but one episode I remember had a rotting corpse in a public pool that would drown kids who swam in it. I can't remember the name of the episode, but the one that fricked me up the most had some sort of unseen presence demon in the basement that would eat kids, and so the main character ended up feeding a bully to it in exchange for a new bike. Holy crap, just thinking about this brought back a memory I had completely forgotten. Just realized that I have something for this question. There was a show that came out when I was a teenager, although I think it was marketed more towards pre-teens, where these kids had been locked in a basement their whole lives because their dad experimented on them and gave them powers. The few episodes I watched didn't have a dark tone, but the whole concept seemed a bit messed up to me. I remember that show. It was called Lab Rats and aired on Disney Channel. I loved THT show as a kid, but looking back on the premise of it, it was kinda messed up. While it was only a single episode, the Teen Titans episode where Starfire gets thrown like 30 years into the future and discovers the Titans split after her disappearance, and the majority of whom are in very bad places. Cyborg is basically stuck in Titan Tower on life support. Beast Boy is working in a circus and treated terribly, and Raven shut herself off from the world. Robin is the only one who is still okay, having become Nightwing. There are plenty of other TT episodes that also fit the bill, like the one with Red Star, the Russian hero that sacrifices himself to contain like a reactor meltdown, and the stuff with Raven's father near the end of the show. But Starfire's episode stuck with me the most. There was an old show called Captain Power, which was a post-apocalyptic freedom fighters type show. In one episode, one of the characters sacrifices herself to blow up an enemy base, all while still communicating with her love interest, who is the hero of the story. The hero listens to her die, while not being able to do anything about it. The show was written by J. Michael Straczynski, who later went on to write Babylon 5. In an interview, he later said it wrote it to cope with the death of a friend who killed herself while on the phone with him. To add to that, my understanding is that the show was cancelled, so the writers were given free rein to finish the show. At the end of Tom and Jerry, I remember them being thrown out of their home, being depressed they couldn't take it anymore, and decided to wait for the train on the tracks. The show ended with them waving at the screen goodbye with train honking in the background. As a kid I didn't think much of it, but now I'm like WTF. If I remember it correctly, the actual story had Tom being rejected by a female cat, causing him to enter depression, and Jerry attempts to comfort Tom, until Jerry sees his own ex stroll past him with her new husband, which causes Jerry to also become depressed. I always loved Tarzan as a kid, but I never noticed that Clayton dies by accidentally hanging himself in the vines. But you can clearly see it when Tarzan is looking up at him and a flash of lightning shows his shadow. I will never watch that ending the same again. Adventure Time has a lot of dark undertones that I never caught when I originally watched it as a kid. But man, going back and rewatching, some of that stuff was dark. Adventure Time was supposed to be for adults. How it got to be a kids show is beyond me, which is why some of the demons look like vaginas. Avatar: The Last Airbender. Genocide of a whole group of people and one child plans to get revenge and stop the massive invading army. Invader Zim, especially the episode where Zim harvests children's organs. Any episode really has something going for it. I was going to go for the Bologna one personally. Star Wars. The Clone Wars is probably the darkest canon part of Star Wars. It wasn't targeted to young kids, but more to older kids, preteens. It featured mauling, live dissection, neurotoxic virus, torture, brain control worms, choking, mass murder, genocide, child murder. Shout out to that time Ahsoka decapitated 4 Mandalorian guards at once. The Dark Crystal. It's questionably for kids at all, but it's about a group of crypt keeper looking vultures who suck the life essence out of cute little creatures and turn them into husks. I grew up in Vietnam, and there we have a Vietnamese version of Cinderella with the same storyline, except at the end, Cinderella boiled her stepsister alive, made a dish out of the flesh and fed it to her stepmother. It wasn't until the stepmother finished eating that Cinderella told her she just cannibalized her own daughter. Stepmother died instantly due to shock. Cinderella lived happily ever after. That is metal. Legend of Korra. I applaud it, but her dealing with mental illness and actually showed her killing somebody by wrapping a metal plate around their head. Wasn't her that did that. It was Toph's daughter. Children's book. The American Girl doll Addie. She is enslaved in the South on a plantation. The surveyor makes them eat larvae as punishments. She and her mother run away after they witness her older brother and father being sold at auctions to another plantation, leaving behind her toddler sister. She's 11. Fast forward a few years to after the Civil War, and her brother finds her up north, with his freaking arm missing. These books are for 11-year-olds. The American Girl doll Kirsten's book about her background had her best friend die of a disease while they were traveling somewhere. My memory is fuzzy, but I remember sobbing. Power Rangers Spd did a 2-part episode where one of the Rangers had to confront the monster who killed their father, and they didn't try to sugarcoat it. They explicitly had the monster tell him, "I'm the one who killed your father." The original Land Before Time. Littlefoot's mom dies just off screen, shown through shadows. Sarah is separated from her family in a heart-wrenching scene. Depression, abandonment and various other issues are addressed. This movie is fantastic. but so messed up, and most of us probably watched it as little kids because it had dinosaurs. This one episode of Tom and Jerry where Tom's being summoned to heaven, but will go to heck if he doesn't get Jerry to sign his deed on time. He begs and pleads Jerry to sign it while the clock chimes, and as he finally gets him to sign, the pen runs out of ink. Tom cries and screams and begs not to go to heck. That messed me up. All Dogs Go to Heaven. That movie is about mobsters, underground casinos, assassination attempts, and how to properly disguise a child so she can gamble at the horse track. You can never come back. Frick that movie. There's a British show called Young Dracula, and the 2 seasons are just normal kids slapstick humor with vampires and slayers and whatnot about this innocent kid who is trying to live a normal life despite being the son of Count Dracula. The show then resumes about 4 years later, and the main character has to do things like decide if he should let his girlfriend die or turn her into a vampire. He does the latter, and she starts killing people, dumps him and runs off with this prick who gets her killed, off camera, and is completely indifferent about it when describing the incident. A bit later, the main character is tricked into thinking his best friend is plotting against him, even though he's actually shown to be totally devoted, so he murders him without giving him a chance to explain himself, or any warning at all, really. Full stop. Rugrats. Looking back, there was a few questionable episode. The episode Ruthless Tommy. Tommy literally gets kidnapped. Angelica's worst nightmare was a pretty messed up episode as well, and at the end her mother is no longer pregnant. Also, the show So Weird on Disney Channel was a really great show and one of my favorites, but some episodes were creepy at times or pretty sad. Are You Afraid of the Dark on Nickelodeon is such a great show, but some episodes could get dark or pretty sad for a teen show. The Rugrats movie, especially when Tommy finally snaps and tries to dump banana food on Dill so the monkeys can take him away. Dill wants his monkeys and monkeys want their nanas. Everybody gets what they want. Land Before Time. An entire generation grew up watching the whimsical adventures of a group of dinos with songs in many colorful films, and then they watch the first movie and boom. Dead mother, abandoned dinos, starvation, bitter fighting and a genuinely murderous T-Rex. The DCAU was spectacular for hitting the feels and going to dark places. Off the top of my head, some good examples include everyone dealing with the death of Superman in frighteningly real human ways. The one where Robin was trying to hunt down and potentially kill the man who killed his parents. Bats and Robin trying to save a little girl only to have that girl be a piece of Clayface that had separated and grown its own personality. Then that girl gets absorbed by Clayface, killing her. Robin being tortured by the Joker to the point where Robin ends up killing Joker to escape. Just the tip of the iceberg. I have to add 2 more. When Batgirl's accident causes all-out war between Batman and Gordon. And when Batman is sent to kill Ace of the Royal Flush Gang. Series of unfortunate events kinda has this as its gimmick. The kids lose their parents in a house fire and are sent to live with Count Olaf, an abusive, neglectful guardian who makes them into his servants and slaps and threatens them when they step out of line. He tries to marry 14-year-old Violet, allegedly just for her money, but he keeps making creepy comments about how pretty she is, and threatens to drop her baby sister off a tower if she doesn't comply. And that's only the first book. Later the kids have countless trusted adults murdered in front of them, survive several attempted murders themselves, are forced to team up with Count Olaf for their own survival, lie, steal, burn down a hotel causing an unknown amount of casualties, and discover that everyone from their own parents to the narrator was involved in morally questionable conspiracies and decades-long cycles of conflict, the full extent of which they will probably never know. Recommended for ages 9-12. Not really the darkest per se, but the story in A Tale of Two Stands from Gravity Falls is far more adult than many storylines I've seen in cartoons. I don't mean adult as in genocide or war or any of the usual ideas considered adult. Those ones are a lot more common in kids media than people think. I mean adult as in it's something adults are far more likely to identify with than kids. War and death can be addressed pretty easily in kids media, since for the average person it's a problem that's usually pretty distant but sometimes has to be dealt with closer to home, regardless of age. And if you're not explicit, you can usually get away with having it in your story. But slowly growing distant from someone close to you, getting kicked out, becoming homeless, and enduring family estrangement over an accidental mistake are all very adult issues that most kids haven't even had time to experience. Not to mention guilt over something that you spend 30 years trying to fix. It's a sense of loneliness and things falling apart over time. Those concepts are generally a lot more familiar to adults than children, especially the average cartoon watcher. As for something more generally dark, Gravity Falls has plenty of that too. Bill's line about having children he needs to make into corpses is still one of the darkest lines I've ever heard a cartoon character say, and I have no idea how Alex got Disney to allow it. And the Journal 3 that got released added more, with Bill planning to fake Dipper's suicide in sock opera and potentially Mabel's afterwards. And the entry about Ford's eye bleeding from the possessions. The pages of the journal are splattered all over with blood, of course. An episode of Smart Guy where the kids are coaxed into some random middle-aged dude's basement to try out a surfing video game he created. The PR file is basically like No One Surfs with Clothes On He, and proceeds to show the kids a scrapbook filled with kids in their underwear. Luckily, the kids are able to read the situation, make an excuse to leave, and get the proper authorities. Pretty messed up considering the pages of kids in the scrapbook. Milo and Otis. One of my favorite films as a kid, but as an adult all I see is puppies and kittens put in dangerous situations. Doesn't help with all the horrible allegations thrown at the makers that hit dead ends. I also forgot about the close-ups of a cat and dog giving birth. Life is beautiful but freaking disgusting at once. Il était une fois. Lavi loved this show as a kid. No idea if it has an English version, but it's a human biology how the body works type of show with cute characters posing as blood cells etc explaining their functions. Yesterday I started watching the series on my phone as a going to sleep story time thing with my 4-year-old daughter. There's a scene where white blood cells go berserk. Cut to a little girl on a bed with a doctor taking blood. Is it serious, asks her mother. Seeing that my daughter is a little worried, I tell her the girl is going to be fine. Probably just a fever. Yes, it's blood cancer. Hey, looks like the battery died on my phone. How about that? Spoiler, they give her a bone marrow transplant and she recovers. The only one who dies in the series, Grandpa, of old age, in the episode that deals with aging and death. The Sergeant and the Old Globus also have dying scenes in 2 different episodes, but they're back for the next. For me it was the whole of Avatar, The Last Airbender Season 3, specifically Azula's mental decline. Throughout the whole show she was always a precise killing machine, but her father only used her his whole life to gain power and she neglected her mother. She started losing her sanity and it all ends tragically when she fights in an Agni Kai with her brother and loses. Her screams still echo in my head. Power Rangers from the late 90s until Disney bought them in 2001 to 2002. Child abduction, In Space, Lightspeed Rescue, Child murder, Lost Galaxy, Non-Monster, Murder, Lost Galaxy, Time Force, Wild Force, Child slavery, Lightspeed Rescue, Slavery, Lost Galaxy, Demons, Lightspeed Rescue, Heck, Lightspeed Rescue, Racism, In Space, Time Force. Terrorism. Okay, that's the whole series technically. Yeah, there's more too, but I'm just going straight off the dome right now. I remember when I read the book that the movie 8th Graders Don't Cry, Achtstgropers Hulen Niet in the original Dutch, is based on. I was about 10 at the time and reading this book about a girl with cancer that dies at the end really hit me hard. Pretty much every episode of Degrassi, The Next Generation. I haven't seen the original. Maybe that one too. The pilot episode is literally about a pedophile luring a middle school girl into his hotel room. Later on in the series there's a school shooting and Drake gets paralyzed and also a main character later gets stabbed to death. It was an issues-driven show, for sure. I am old enough to remember when Manny's abortion was not allowed to be aired in the US and I had to visit some shady websites to stream it. Whilst this isn't from any of the movies, the Bionicle web serial Dark Mirror is really quite dark. It's set in an alternate universe, where the Toa, the main heroes of the series, have turned evil, taken complete control of the world, and kill anyone who opposes them. Since it's an alternate universe, a lot of characters who are important to the main story get killed off in some quite graphic ways, and the main villain of the story eventually gets sliced in half by a portal closing on her. A lot of the supplementary material for Bionicle was darker than you would expect from LEGO, but Dark Mirror stands out among all of it. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.